received a great set of questions from a reader of Centering Prayer. Sitting quietly in God's presence can change your life, and want to take a couple minutes to answer it. The reader asked, "May I ask you to help me understand how finding healing and transformation from one's false self and shadow through centering prayer?" I thought in centering prayer, one did not entertain thoughts, feelings, sensations, and so forth, but focused on being with God. It seems that conscious work needs to be done for one's false self and shadow to be transformed. How then can one experience healing and transformation while one practices centering prayer? Does it occur in the nanosecond of communion between God and the individual, or in some other manner? Well, first, thank you for a great question. I love this, and I'm going to do my best to provide an answer. And if readers or need to follow up, please post additional questions in the comments, or you can email me directly at deepdivespirituality@gmail.com. I think the first thing to say is we need to talk about what the false self actually is, and even this idea of a shadow. Again, the false self is essentially the sum total of all of our experiences in the world, our acquired talents, and then all the different defense mechanisms and strategies that we had to implement from childhood, essentially today to protect us, really. And essentially, this is about what we do to protect ourselves, to get the love that we need. And so you suppress certain parts of yourself, and those things become the shadow. And the shadow doesn't have to be bad things. It can also just be repressed parts of you that you were never able to go back to. So, for example, maybe you really loved music when you were younger, and this creative part of you can be sort of a shadow. And then, of course, also we can have more difficult or counterproductive parts of ourself that had to be suppressed that come out in a shadow. And so oftentimes a person's shadow can be things like anger or lust or some of the other sort of 7 deadly sins type of things. Those things can be suppressed and sit there essentially in our unconscious. And so how do we get healing from that? Now, the reader asks a fantastic question, because the whole exercise and practice of centering prayer is essentially surrendering our thoughts, our feelings, sensations, simply so that we can sit in silence before God in hopeful anticipation of God's gift of real contemplation, where we sort of have this soul-to-soul experience with God, if you want to say that. We experience God not as an object, but as almost an isness as we connect with the divine, or better, the divine connects with us. So how do we get healed of the junk that floats up out of our unconscious if we're not supposed to focus on it? Now that's the critical question. And here are my thoughts on this. This is a long-term process, right? I always believe that healing can happen in a moment, right? We've experienced that, but essentially it's both a crisis moment sometimes, and then it's a process of living it out. And so the way that I think God works to heal and transform and break up the false self and the shadow so that we can essentially live out of our true self as that person that God created us to be, that person loved by God. It's essentially just by surrendering the thoughts as they come up, right? And so if you will, the partial healing happens every time a disturbing thought arises out of our unconscious. I talk about this a lot in the section part 4 of my book, where we talk about confronting the false self. And essentially, this is where, when we think about the 4 R's: resist no thought, retain no thought, react to no thought, return gently with our sacred word to Jesus comes in, especially that third one. It's react to no thought. How do you slowly get healed of the broken parts of ourselves? It's by not reacting when things that we might want to hide from God or even hide from ourselves arise. When you talk about unconscious work, a lot of times people talk about it's knowing that you know things that you wish you didn't know, right? And so in a sense, what happens in our deep centering prayer is those things will float up. It's the stuff that we repress. It's the truths that we'd rather not face. And when we allow those to come up and not just jam them back down, but instead don't react, that's where that idea of apatheia comes in, where we can just be okay with whatever emerges. And when we surrender those to God with the sacred word, slowly the power that those things have over us, sort of on the subconscious, unconscious level, begin to be broken up. And so that's how you would experience healing and transformation. Again, that takes place over time. This isn't the first time you do centering prayer or the 10th time, and I don't even know if it's the 100th time. There's no timetable on that because, again, the goal of centering prayer is to sit in silence with God. This healing that gets talked about, and I've seen people break into tears literally the first time they've ever done centering prayer. But I know my own experience looking back, and again, from 2022, I'm looking back essentially over 10 years of work that God's done in my own life. It's been a little slower, but I can say today that I've experienced substantial healing by essentially surrendering things as they come up, not reacting to them, and letting those go. And so, yeah, to answer your question, does it occur in the nanosecond of communion between God and the individual? I think you can think of it that way. But in a sense, God's healing us whenever we just recognize that whatever comes up, whether how beautiful it is or how ugly it is, if we just give those to God with the sacred word, that acceptance, right? That's what we're talking about. You get healed in those moments of grace that do come from time to time in this contemplative setting where you get the opportunity to essentially accept the fact that you're unconditionally accepted by God. In other words, it's when our soul encounters God's isness, and God's isness is nothing more, nothing less than total love. That's what heals us. Now, a couple tips for the journey. I think it's important also, and you can go into centering prayer with these kind of prayers. Like I like to use the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then I also like to use a prayer that I first heard from a president of Asbury Seminary when I was a student, Maxie Dunham. He got this from Macrina Vidercare, who is a Roman Catholic spiritual teacher. And she has this beautiful prayer: God, help me believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. Healing takes place when even the ugly parts of ourselves arise, and we're not afraid of them, and we just give them to God with our sacred word. I hope this helps. Again, I'd love to hear back from you, and also anybody else listening to this video. If you have questions about centering prayer, I will do my very best to answer them so I can be, and it would be my privilege to serve you. Again, you can put questions in the comments, or you can send a note, deepdivespirituality@gmail.com. If you found this helpful, share this video with others, and please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.